Thank you. Really, thank you for being a part of this community today, but thank you especially to those of you who have been here for the last 7 Sundays, that journey that we have made into the reality of the struggle of life. I normally like to imagine that what happens here on a Sunday morning makes you feel better when you leave than when you came. I like for this to be uplifting and encouraging. I like to shine a light on the blessings of our life, and I like to celebrate that. And so for the last 6 weeks, I kind of hoped that what we would do is we would take a hard look at the difficulties of life, at the struggles of life, essentially to remind ourselves that we're not alone, that when we are in those dark places, when we are in the difficulties of life's journey, when we are face to face with the struggle, that we're not in this alone. We're all on this journey together, and I thought that would encourage us, that we would find some hope. I totally underestimated how long we would be in the dark and how dark it would get. And so if you've hung in there for the last 7 weeks, thank you for being a part of that. I can tell you that next week we're going to start a new series, and we're going to have a conversation that's going to be much brighter, much lighter. We're going to talk about the best of ourselves. We're going to talk about those things that we would bet our life on, those reliable, good things. So hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have more of that sense of encouragement and sort of enlightening our load. But today, we're going back into the dark. We're going back into the cave. We've got one more time to press into the reality of the difficulty of life. Because life is hard, and the struggle is real. But I don't think it's just true that the struggle is real. I actually believe that the struggle is essential, that the struggle is necessary. And I want to suggest something radical today. The struggle is not just real and it's not just essential, but the struggle is actually good. But before we talk about that, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to remind us and challenge us and encourage us in our hope, in our gratitude. Pray that for myself and for my family, for all of us here, for everyone who encounters this place or these people or this message. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Anybody else excited for ski season, snowboarding, skiing? Anybody else looking forward to it? Yeah. I mean, I look forward to it, but I came by it late. I came by my affection for skiing, and I don't snowboard. My brother is a snowboard, but he has brain damage. So I'm a skier, and I really enjoy skiing. I've done it for 30 years, but I didn't start till I was in my 30s. I grew up around skiing. In fact, the farm that I grew up on was not 10 minutes from a ski area. Granted, it was the Pocono Mountains. It was basically a Colorado-sized bunny run, but I could have gone skiing. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, falling down a mountain with sticks on your feet, that just didn't make sense. But when we moved to Dallas, I was invited, and moving to Dallas to take up skiing is like moving to Iowa to take up surfing. But I'm in Dallas, and I'm in my 30s, and I'm being invited regularly to go to Colorado to speak to students, high school students and college students on ski vacations. This is how they suffered for Jesus. They would go to Colorado on spring break and in the winter and call it a missions trip and I was the justification of the spiritual side of the ski trip. So I would go, but I didn't ski. And the first few trips I went on, I just sat around in the lodge and watched everybody coming back. And they were sharing all those stories, because skiers are like fishermen, and they exaggerate. Oh, the mogul, that mogul, dude, that was so gnarly. That was at least 10 feet tall. You flipped 9 times. That was awesome. And I'd hear all these stories, and I said, I've eventually got to try it. So after I had gone on a couple trips and just been bored, I decided I got a couple lessons, and I went out for the first time, and it was terrible. It was a nightmare. It was awful. I found new ways to humiliate myself because these ski schools were full of 3 and 4 and 5-year-old kids, and they're just zooming around me, and I'm inventing new ways to fall down. I'm falling down just standing there, just waiting, falling down. I'm falling getting on the lift, I'm falling getting off the lift, and this is on the bunny hill. I mean, I'm falling turning, I'm falling trying to turn. I didn't even know how to turn other than to fall down. And every time I fell down, it was a yard sale. My skis went one way, my poles went another way, my hat came off, my glasses came off, and I was falling every 5 minutes. At the end of the day, and I had paid for 2 days of lessons, I thought, this is ridiculous. This is the stupidest thing ever, but I paid for another day, so I'm going to go out the second day. And the second day I went out in the morning, and it was no better. It was worse, because all those 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds who had just learned yesterday were skiing circles around me. And I remember the first time that I actually got my skis pointed down the hill, and I skied by like one of those little toddlers, and I was like, ha, ha, ha. And then I realized I couldn't stop. So I fell down, which was how I stopped. And I went into lunch, and I was sore, and I was crabby, and I was like, this is the worst. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm never going to do this again. When one of the leaders came up and said, how's it going? I said, terrible. I said, how long do you think it'll take before I can ski an entire day and not fall down? And he went, I would hope that you never get to that point. I said, what are you, insane? He said, no, I mean, the point of skiing is that you're always challenging yourself. You should always fall a couple times, because then you know that you're pressing into it. You're going for it. And he got up and left, and I thought, what an idiot. But he was right, There's something about our life that requires obstacles, that requires challenges. There's a necessary part of our life that asks us to take risks, because we're not called to just sit and put ourselves in bubble wrap and just live a safe and secure life. Our life should have adversity as part of it. The struggle is necessary. It gives our life meaning. Psychologists have identified an attribute of people who are clinically depressed. And it is, they have no goals. They take no risks. Their fear overwhelms them. The thought of failure is so overwhelming, and their inadequacy and their insecurity is so crippling that they have no reason to press on. We're supposed to fall down. It's part of what we are called to be. It gives meaning to our life. In the famous words of that great philosopher, Tom Hanks, it's the hard that makes it great. But how do we do that? I mean, if life is this struggle and this constant falling down and getting back up, how do we press on? How do we continue on? Well, that's what we've been talking about for the last 6 weeks. For the last 6 weeks, we've been listening to the wisdom of the Apostle Paul and his wisdom to people who were struggling, and giving them the handholds and the footholds to help them climb and to take those risks and to press into the struggle. And we've talked about things like faith and hope and love and grace. And today we come to the final ingredient in his secret sauce. And the ingredient is one Greek word. It is Eucharisteo. Eucharisteo. If you have a high church background, like you're Anglican or Episcopalian or Catholic or even a liturgical Lutheran or Methodist, you might recognize the word Eucharist. The Eucharist is the ecclesiological liturgical term for the Lord's Supper, for communion. It is the Eucharist. But the Eucharist, the Eucharisteo, is the word that the Apostle Paul uses as he's bringing his conversation to a close in verses 15, 16, and 17 of Colossians chapter 3. And he brackets his final remarks with this term. He says in verse 15, he says, always be Eucharisteo. Always be Eucharisteo. And whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving Eucharisteo through him to God the Father. And he brackets his final comments with this idea that thankfulness is a key ingredient to pressing into the struggle. That thankfulness is the key distinctive of the people of God. But what is thankfulness? What is it really? What does Eucharisteo mean? And a couple weeks ago I began thinking about this, and I realized I used the word thankful or thank you or thanks recklessly, carelessly, thoughtlessly. I kind of know what it means, but I really don't know what it means. I use it as a placeholder when I really don't know what else to say. A number of years ago, I was driving in Dallas. It was late in the evening, late at night, and my family was with me, and we were driving up Central Expressway, and Central Expressway runs through the middle of Dallas. It's I-75, and if you're familiar with it, it's like our I-35 or MOPAC. Most of the time, you are in bumper-to-bumper traffic, but for some reason, late that night, I was driving up I-75, and there was no traffic, so I was, let's just say, exceeding the legal limit generously. And sure enough, as I'm speeding my way up I-75 thinking, I've never seen anything like this. Oh, there's a patrol officer pulling me over. He pulls me over and I pull off to the side of the road, and he comes up and I roll my window down and he says, are you aware that you were speeding? My children are in the car. My wife is in the car. I turned to him and I said, but officer, by the way that I figure it, I have sat still on this highway for so many hours that if you average out my aggregate speed on I-75 over the time that we have lived in Dallas, I am currently not speeding. I am well below the speed limit. To which he looked at me and said, license and registration. And so he went back and he wrote me a ticket, and he came, and the ticket was one of those typical, speeding. I think it was in a construction zone, twice as much of a fine. It was about a week of my income. And he handed me the ticket. And you know what I said to him? Thank you. Now, I know what I meant. I meant thank you for serving our community. Thank you for putting your life out there. But I didn't know what else to say. I wasn't really thankful that he was taking a week of my family's income. I wasn't really thankful that I got pulled over. I wasn't especially thankful that he didn't appreciate the logic of my argument. But I didn't know what else to say, because we use thankfulness, the idea of being thankful, we use it so carelessly, so recklessly. So I decided I'm going to figure out what thankfulness means through the Bible, especially in the New Testament, in the Greek language. So I spent the last week doing a word study of the word Eucharisteo, and I found out that it has a very interesting etymology, that it developed over the centuries from profane and ancient Greek. It began with the word kairo. The word kairo is the word for joy. It came to mean things that are pleasant, things that are pleasurable, things that are charming, things that give people joy are kairo. That morphed into a word charis. And charis came to mean the exchange of joy or a gift of joy. If you're familiar with the word in the church vocabulary, charismatic, it comes from the word charis. It means a gift. It means a gift that brings joy, a gift that brings pleasure, a gift that brings happiness. And Eucharisteo actually is developed from that idea of joy and that idea of the gift of joy and the power of that gift. And as I was researching this, I used my Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. This is a 10-volume resource for the New Testament languages that I purchased when my wife and I were in graduate school and we had no money. And it's 10 volumes, and at the time it was about $200, and we were paying our rent with the coins we found in our sofa cushions. And so you can imagine my wife's pleasure when I told her that I had spent $200 on a 10-volume dictionary of New Testament words. Her response was, "Can we eat it?" I said, "Yes, but it will taste terrible." And I have never had the chance to quote from it, and so now I'm going to get my money's worth, and I'm going to quote. Because in the TDNT, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, there's a 56-page article on the development of the word Eucharisteo. And this is the summary. This is what they say thankfulness means. The basic usage of charis, the root word of Eucharisteo, in ancient Greek is that which delights. Charis is that which causes joy or possesses charm or joyous being which delights in the beautiful. It applies to a favor shown or received. It can identify both the mood or emotion as well as the expression or act of joy. Basically what it's telling us is thankfulness is finding the joy in the pain. It's finding the silver lining in the storm. It's finding the pleasure in the midst of the struggle. That's what it means to be thankful. I believe that when Paul is saying that we should always be this, we should always be this in the midst of the stresses and the struggles of life, he's saying you should look for this. You should search out thankfulness because it will give you the foothold that will see you through the difficult times. But I think he knows how complicated it is. And he kind of parses it out. He explains it in verse 16. He shares 3 ideas. Where do we find this thankfulness? And he shares with us, first of all, a personal idea, and then a relational idea, and a spiritual idea. And the first idea is that we search out thankfulness by caring for our own souls, by searching for those things that are meaningful to us. The way he puts it in verse 16 is he says, let the message about Christ in all of its richness fill your lives. Find the good things. Search for the good things. And we know how to do this. We do it all the time. I see it on television all the time. Whenever there's a tornado, and it hits one of those mobile home parks, because they are trailer targets or tornado targets, and, it goes through and it tears all the homes apart. And the camera crews roll in. And they find the people who talk about how it sounded like a freight train and all the things that you've probably seen 100 times. What do they always say? They always say, well, at least no one was hurt. At least we're okay. At least we have our health. Our lives we can rebuild. That's searching for that hope in the midst of the storm. That's what it means to search out thankfulness. We do it all the time. We say, well, it could be worse, or at least it's not this, or in the worst case scenario, we say, well, they lived a good life. And what we're doing is we're grasping for those things that make us hope that this isn't the end. We spiritualize it. We quote Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. And we hold on to that idea that all things work together for good. And that's good stuff, but it's just not enough for me. It just doesn't do it. It doesn't feel substantial enough when the real devastation of life happens. What does he say? He says, let the message of Christ in all of its richness, the story of the gospel, the story of the one who faced adversity every day, and yet was always loving and always kind, the one who knew and understood the greater purpose, even when everyone around him was his adversary. And those who were betraying him and those who were closest to him were disappointing him. He understood. The fullness and the richness of his life is the richness of his promises, the richness of his example, the distinctiveness of the life that he calls us to. For me, it's one thing above all else. It's the resurrection. It's the promise that it's not over till Sunday, and we're stuck in Friday. It's not over until the stone is rolled away and we're living on the other side of the stone. That it's not over until he rules and reigns. It's not over until he says it's over. It's not over till Sunday and we're living on Friday. There's a famous book, it's called It's Friday, but Sunday's Coming by Tony Campolo. And he tells a story about a church that he went to in Philadelphia. And that was a phrase that they used. The pastor had so worked up the congregation that all he would have to do is get up in the pulpit and go, "It's Friday!" And everybody would yell back at him, "But Sunday's coming!" And it was their way of affirming the idea that it's not over till he says it's over. It's not over till Sunday. And we find our thankfulness when we search that out. I think that's how we care for our own soul. We don't give up because it's not the end. The next component is a relational component. And he says, teach and counsel each other with the wisdom that God gives, with the wisdom the Lord gives you. Teach and counsel one another. We are made better by our interaction with one another. We make each other better. Our understanding, our companionship, knowing we are not alone, helps us to be thankful in the midst of the struggle. In 1952, Albert Schweitzer won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was a scientist and a physician and a missionary and an explorer. He was a full Renaissance man, and he wrote in his journal this statement: "In everyone's life, at some time, our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flame by an encounter with another human being. We should all be thankful for those people who rekindle our inner spirit." You see, it's a two-way street. Teaching and counseling. The word for counseling is the word nutheo. And nutheo is an interesting word because it means to have right understanding. In fact, there's a branch of counseling, therapeutic counseling, called nouthetic counseling. And the goal of that counseling is to help a client understand what they're experiencing, what they are feeling, why they are the way they are. That is nouthetic counseling. And that's the word that he uses here. There are times when we teach, and there's times when we seek to understand. But it's a two-way street. There's times when we are taught, don't do what I've done, learn from my mistakes. And there's times when we are guided and helped to understand ourselves. It happens in community. It's here that the foothold of thankfulness is established. In our relationships as we teach and counsel one another with the wisdom that God gives. The third component of thankfulness is a spiritual component where he says, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. And the word that he uses for thankful there is charis, with graceful hearts, with thankful hearts. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. I don't know about you, but I am thankful and will always be thankful for the musicians who sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs in this place. I am thankful to God for the talent that Casey has and the talented musicians who we get to enjoy every week in all of our services. It is a parade. We're lousy with talented musicians, and I am thankful for that every week. It stirs my heart, and I'm not just thankful for them. I'm thankful that I don't have to be one of them, because you don't want that to happen. A couple of years ago, I found out that the techs who record the audio and the video of all of our services in here leave my microphone on all morning long, so that we have a recording of everything I say to you when I'm walking around the mezzanine, of all the stuff I say backstage, and we have a recording of me singing in the services. I am convinced that it is archived somewhere to be used at a future date for blackmail. It says, if you don't do this, we're going to release these songs of you singing in church. Because I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed by the idea that I can't carry a tune in a bucket. I can barely play a radio. And here I am singing with all of these talented musicians. This past week, I went to Chicago with Casey. Casey is in a band called Flying Colors, and they're having a national tour during the week. He flies out, and he comes back, and he's here. So this week, he was in Chicago, and he said, you want to go with me to Chicago? And I said, to a rock and roll show? Yeah, I'll rock with you. Let's go rock. Yeah. And so I flew up to Chicago, and I'm all ready, and I realized I can't rock anymore. It's not in me. I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock, man. They're like, hey, it's just getting going. And I'm like, no. It's Davis. So I had a lot of time with nothing to do while the rock and rollers were out. And Casey and I hung out, and we had a conversation about this verse. I said, I don't understand how this works. I don't understand how people like me who really can't make any offering with our singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, how that really works. He said, well, you're singing to God. God is the audience, first of all. You don't have to do it to impress anybody. And then he said, but you know what it's really about? It's about honesty. It's about being honest. Because that's what singing is. Singing is risk. Singing is the risk of honesty. The risk of raising your voice, of collectively. That's why we sing together. So that we can lift each other up, so that collectively we can say the same things. We can share in the experience. And then he said, look what it says, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Have you read the Psalms? To which I said, I'm familiar. Yeah, the Psalms are these confessionals of struggle and of pain and of doubt and of fear. There are also confessions of joy, but that's why we sing together. Because sometimes we sing in a confessional way. This is what I believe. This is where my heart is. And sometimes we sing in an aspirational way. This is where I wish I was. I love you, Lord. I wish I really did. I want to. Sometimes it's confessional and sometimes it's aspirational, but it's the honesty of it. It's the willingness to be honest in which we find the foothold for our gratitude and our thankfulness. And we cultivate that spiritual thanksgiving as we are honest in our community and with one another and with God. This is complicated stuff. I don't think we've really solved what does thankfulness means, but I think what Paul is saying in verse 16 is that it means these things. It means reflecting on the richness of the message of Christ. It means sharing, community, teaching, and counseling, and it means singing and celebrating and being honest with one another. These are the components that build that joy that is the Eucharisteo. Because it's in that joy that we find the hope in the storm. There's a woman named Melanie Beatty. She wrote a number of books about codependency and recovery issues. And her most famous book is Codependent No More. It sold over 2 million copies. And this is what she says about gratitude. She said, gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos into order, confusion to clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. The power of thankfulness, the power to see us through. I believe that that's what he means in verse 17 when he says that whatever we say or whatever we do everything as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving Eucharisteo, giving thanks. It is the distinctive of thanksgiving that represents our faith, that we can find reason to be thankful in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the storm. that we recognize the importance of falling down. I went back out that afternoon, and when I was on the second day of skiing, and I started to get the hang of it. I remember the first time that I actually stopped without falling down. It was like I won the Super Bowl. Like I kicked the winning field goal. It was like, yeah! And all I did was like not fall down when I stopped. And over the years, I've gotten better and better and better. And it was because I wasn't afraid to fall down. I haven't been skiing in a couple of years. A couple of years ago, we were up in Colorado as a family, and we were skiing together, and one of my daughters was with me, and we were standing at the top of one of these double black diamond death runs. And I always would do them, but I was 61 years old. I mean, come on. The earth was barely invented before I was born. And so I'm standing there, and I looked at my daughter, and I said, I'm doing it. And so down I go, and it wasn't pretty. And I fell a couple times, but the run was so steep that when I fell, I was like this, like leaning against. You just kind of lose your balance. You don't really fall. You just go from mogul to mogul, and I made it down. And I got to the bottom, and I'm looking up at this wall of moguls and snow, and I'm like, never again. That was it. I'm not doing that anymore. But that doesn't mean that I don't look for things that challenge me, that I don't accept the struggles, that I wrap my life in bubble wrap and say I'm going to mail it in, because I understand it's essential. It's not just essential, it's good. We should never get to the point in our life where we are afraid of the struggle, because life is hard, and the struggle is real. And we have our faith, and we have our hope, and we have love, and we have thankfulness to strengthen us through it. So I'm glad you were here today. I'm glad you've stuck it out over these 7 weeks. I appreciate that. Thank you for being a part of this. And if I can leave you with anything else, thank you.